If you think the silence of the desert is terrifying, you have never heard the silence before a massacre. It is not the absence of sound. It is a collective holding of breath. The crickets stop chirping. The field mice scurry deep into their burrows. Even the wind seems to hesitate, not daring to blow through the thorny bushes. Silas Kincaid and Alara Vance were in the eye of that silence. They had found temporary shelter at pump station number 4, an industrial ruin standing solitary in the middle of the valley like the skeleton of an iron dinosaur. Giant rusted pipes ran in zigzags everywhere. Gears as large as real people had stopped turning long ago, covered in dust and cobwebs. The smell of old machine oil, the smell of rust, and the smell of bat guano created an atmosphere that was thick and suffocating. "Turn off the light," Silas ordered, his voice so low it was like a whisper of the wind. Alara turned down the hurricane lantern, then blew it out completely. Darkness descended, thick and stifling. "Are they coming?" she asked, hands clutching the revolver Silas had just given her. It was heavier than she imagined, cold in her sweat-drenched palm. 10 gunmen, Silas said, eyes glued to the crack of a broken window, looking out into the night. "I count 10 horse shadows separating from the direction of the stone mansion. They do not carry torches. They are moving in a fan formation. These are not drunk thugs, Alara. This is Thorne's Black Guard." The Black Guard. The name made anyone on this frontier shudder. Killers who never left witnesses. "Can we run?" Alara asked, though she knew the answer. "There is no time," Silas replied, disengaging the safety on his Winchester. The tiny click sounded sharp and concise. "My horse is exhausted. If we go out into the open ground, we are cannon fodder. Here, in this maze of iron and steel, I have the advantage." He turned to look at her in the dim light. "Do you know how to load ammunition?" I used to see Thomas do it." Silas took the bandolier off his shoulder and threw it to her. "Do not just watch. Do it. When I fire all the rounds, hand me the loaded gun. Do not drop the bullets. Do not panic. And most importantly, do not stick your head out." Right at that moment, the sound of crunching gravel rang out outside. Very faint, but to the hearing of an old wolf like Silas, it was as loud as thunder. "They are here." The first bullet did not come from Silas. It tore through the night from outside, flew past the window frame, and embedded itself into a rusted water pipe right next to Alara's head. The ear-piercing sound of metal on metal made her scream and fall heavily onto the floor. "Get down!" Silas roared. He immediately sprang up, the muzzle of the Winchester flashing a brilliant orange spark. Bang! A terrified scream rang out from the darkness outside. A shadow fell off a horse. "1," Silas counted, his voice icy. He worked the lever action, the hot brass casing ejected, falling with a clink onto the concrete floor. The siege had begun. Outside, gunfire roared like firecrackers. Bullets rained into the pump station, punching through the thin corrugated iron walls, creating holes that glittered with moonlight. The sound of breaking glass, the sound of bullets ricocheting off metal created a chaotic symphony of death. But inside, Silas Kincaid was not chaotic. He moved like a ghost. He fired a shot at the east window, then immediately ducked low, ran to the hole on the west, and fired a second shot. He did not shoot blindly. Every one of his bullets had an address. Bang. 2. Bang. 3. "Gun!" Silas shouted, tossing the empty rifles behind him without looking. Alara hands trembling, but her mind, strangely alert, grabbed the scorching hot gun. She shoved the fully loaded revolver into his hand. She was not afraid anymore. Fear had been burned away by adrenaline. She sat on the floor, fingers deftly inserting cold bullets into the hot cylinder. The acrid smell of gunpowder rushed into her nose, but she found it safe. It was the smell of resistance. She did not hide behind him. She was his support. "Left side, main door," Alara shouted when she saw a black shadow glide past the door crack. Silas spun around, the pistol in his hand, spitting fire twice in succession. The soldier, who was about to kick the door in, was thrown backward, his chest blooming with blood. "4. Well done, madam," Silas praised, eyes never leaving the targets. But the blackguard were not men who gave up easily. They realized Silas was entrenched. The gunfire outside suddenly ceased. "Did they run out of ammo?" Alara whispered, hand still gripping the bandolier. "No," Silas panted, sweat streaming down his face, soaking his eye patch. "They are changing tactics. They will use fire." As soon as he finished speaking, a glass bottle filled with kerosene with a burning rag was thrown through the window. It shattered on the floor, covered in old grease. Whoosh! The fire flared up violently, licking at the rotten wooden walls, dividing the room in two. The temperature skyrocketed. Thick black smoke billowed up, stinging their eyes. "Get out! We must get out!" Silas coughed violently, pulling Alara's hand. "But they are waiting outside. Staying here means burning to death. Follow me." Silas kicked open the back door of the pump station, which led to a scrapyard full of giant water tanks. He pushed Alara to run first, while he walked backward, guns still pointed toward the sea of fire. As soon as they rushed out the door, gunfire rang out again. The soldiers had surrounded the area. "Run to that water tank," Silas pointed. Alara ran headlong. Bullets plowed the earth beneath her feet. The wind hissed in her ears. Zip! Alara tripped and fell. She looked up and saw a soldier standing on top of a water tank, a rifle aimed straight at her. He sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to freeze. Alara closed her eyes, but the gunshot rang out not from above, but from behind her. Silas had rushed forward. He did not have time to shoot. He used his entire body to shield her. Thwack! That sound was terrible. It was not like an explosion. It was the sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. A wet, heavy sound. Silas let out a roar of pain. His whole body jerked upward, then collapsed heavily on top of Alara. But even as he fell, his hand was still raised. The Colt Navy fired one last shot. The soldier on the water tank was hit in the middle of his forehead, falling freely to the ground like a sandbag. "Silas!" Alara screamed, pushing him off her. Blood. So much blood. It gushed from Silas's right shoulder, staining his faded coat red. He lay on his back, gasping for air, face pale, cold sweat pouring out like a bath. Do not scream." Silas gritted his teeth, left hand pressing tight against the wound. "Help me. Get in there." They dragged themselves into the gap between two large water tanks, where the darkness temporarily hid them. Alara tore the hem of her dress, hands trembling as she pressed hard onto Silas's spurting wound. "You are shot! You are shot!" she sobbed, tears mixing in with the black soot on her face. "I know. Arg!" Silas groaned as Alara tightened the pressure on the wound. The bullet went through the shoulder, did not hit the lung. Damned lucky. Outside, the gunfire had become sporadic. The remaining soldiers were cautiously closing the circle. They knew the beast was wounded. Silas leaned his back against the cold water tank, his breathing broken. He looked at Alara, trying to stop his bleeding. In the dim moonlight, her face, smudged, frightened but resilient, looked exactly like Thomas's face on that fateful day. "Why?" Alara asked, her voice choked. "Why did you take the bullet for me? You could have run away." Silas closed his eyes, a bitter smile appearing on his lips. "Alara," he called her name, not Madame anymore. His voice was weak, but every word was clear. "Do you know why I knew your husband?" Alara shook her head. "You said he saved you. That is only half the truth." Silas opened his eyes. His single eye looked straight at her, containing a suffering even greater than the bullet hole in his shoulder. "5 years ago, I did not wander to your ranch. I was hired to go there." Alara stopped her hands. The blood in her body seemed to freeze. "What are you saying?" "Thorn," Silas whispered, every breath a torture. "He hired me. $500 to kill Thomas Vance. He said Thomas was a troublemaker, hindering progress." Alara pulled her hands back as if burned. She looked at Silas as if looking at a monster. Did you kill him?" "No," Silas said hurriedly, coughing violently. "I lay there, aiming at him through the scope for 2 days, but I could not pull the trigger. I watched him work. I watched him tend to the cattle. I watched him play with your daughter on the porch. He was a good man, and I lowered the gun." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "That was when I was shot in the back by Thorne's men. He had sent another gunman to follow and supervise me. He knew I was soft-hearted. I was shot, left for dead, and then, ironically, it was Thomas, the man I intended to kill, who was the one to save me." Tears rolled down Silas's cheeks, mixing into the streak of blood at the corner of his mouth. "When Thomas was killed 6 months later in a landslide accident, I knew it was Thorne's doing. I ran away, Alara. I lived in hiding out of fear and out of shame. I owed Thomas a life, and I owe you a husband." He looked down at his blood-soaked hand. His blood and Alara's blood mixed together. "This bullet, it is not enough to pay the debt, but it is all I can do." Alara sat there, stunned. The truth crashed down on her head like a rock. The man lying in front of her, the person who had just saved her life, was the very assassin hired to destroy her family. Chaotic emotions surged. Anger, disgust, gratitude, sorrow. She looked at Silas's bleeding wound. She looked into his single eye, full of regret, and she remembered Mia. She remembered her purpose. Alara took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. She tore another piece of fabric from her dress. "Do not speak any more," she said, her voice cold but no longer trembling. She bent down, continuing to bandage him. Do you not hate me?" Silas was surprised. Alara tightened the knot, making Silas groan in pain. "I hate you," she said, looking straight into his eye. "I hate you for going there. I hate you for not saving him. But Thomas, he was the one who gave you the cup of water. He forgave you before you could apologize." She took Silas's revolver, shoving it into his left hand. "You owe me a life, Silas Kincaid, and I do not give you permission to die to avoid the debt. Stand up. We still have 6 more men to deal with." Silas looked at the small woman in front of him. In that moment, he did not see a weak widow. He saw a warrior, a flame burning bright amidst the dark night of his life. He gripped her shoulder, gritting his teeth to stand up. Pain tore through his right shoulder, but a new strength was spreading in his chest. "All right, madam," Silas said, sweating profusely, but the smile of the ghost had returned to his lips. "Let us show Thorn's hounds what hell is like." Outside the iron wall, footsteps rang out again. But this time, inside the pump station, there were no longer two prey trembling in fear. It was a pair of reapers, one seeking to redeem a soul, and one fighting to protect the future. Have you ever held a long-range rifle? Not to shoot paper targets at a shooting range, but held it while lying flat on the cold, rocky ground, the night wind whipping your face, and through a violently shaking scope, you see the only man who can save your child walking into his death. It is heavy, the weight of cold steel, the weight of life. Alara Vance was feeling that weight. She lay on the crest of Howling Hill, exactly 600 yards from the stone mansion. Silas's Winchester, rested on a flat rock, cushioned by a rolled-up coat, was pointing straight down into the valley. Her eye was glued to the scope, her breath condensed, forming thin wisps of white smoke in the cold night. Inhale, exhale halfway. Hold, squeeze the trigger. Between two heartbeats, Silas's voice still echoed in her ears, like an oracle from the night before. "Why do we not go to the city?" Alara asked, her hands trembling as she held the rifle. "We have the evidence. The federal marshals will come." Silas was sitting by a small fire, using a red-hot knife to cauterize the bullet wound on his shoulder. The smell of burning flesh rose, making Alara nauseous, but he did not utter a single sound. He only gritted his teeth, sweat pouring off him like a bath. "The city is 2 days' travel from here," Silas said, after exhaling sharply, his face pale. 2 days is too long. Thorn knows we have the evidence. He will not sit still. He will kill the girl to wipe out all ties before fleeing. He looked at Alara with his single bloodshot eye. "We cannot run. We must attack." "But your right arm is injured." Alara pointed to the arm wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. "You cannot shoot." "Correct," Silas nodded, handing the rifle to her. "Therefore, you will be the one to pull the trigger." "I have never fired a rifle. I have only chased away wolves with a shotgun." "A shotgun is to scare. This thing is to kill," Silas said coldly. He pointed up at an oil lamp hanging on a tree branch 50 meters away. "You do not need to hit Thorn's head. He will be surrounded by guards. You need to shoot this." The heavy iron gates of the stone mansion opened with an ear-piercing screech. Silas Kincaid walked in. He did not sneak. He walked straight through the main entrance, both hands raised high above his head, his left hand holding a leather tube. His faded coat was soaked with blood on the right shoulder, walking with a limp, the appearance of an old wolf, cornered. 10 gun barrels immediately pointed at him from all directions. The guards on the ramparts, the ones hiding behind the meticulously tended rose bushes. "Do not shoot," Silas shouted, his voice hoarse but echoing across the courtyard. "I come to make a deal. I have what the Baron wants." The exquisitely carved oak doors of the mansion opened. Brilliant golden light from crystal chandeliers spilled out, contrasting sharply with the dust and darkness where Silas stood. Baron Thorn walked out, He wore a wine-red velvet suit holding a crystal wine glass, looking as if he were attending a gala dinner rather than a war. Silas Kincaid, Thorne smiled, the smile of a snake that had just caught a mouse. I thought you had died rotting in some hole already. I am a ghost, Thorne, Silas smirked, though blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth. And ghosts are very hard to kill. He raised the leather tube high. The water map, and your love letter with the governor. It is all here. I traded for the girl. Thorne narrowed his eyes at the tube. He signaled. 2 burly guards rushed forward, one using a rifle butt to strike hard against the back of Silas's neck. Silas collapsed. He did not resist. He let them drag him roughly into the main hall, leaving a long trail of blood on the pristine white marble floor. Elara saw it all through the scope. She saw Silas being beaten. She saw him being dragged inside. "Do not die," she whispered, her index finger resting lightly on the cold trigger. "Please do not die before I am ready." She adjusted the scope, not at Thorne's head. She raised the barrel higher, through the large French window that was flung wide open. Her target was not a person. Her target was a thick, golden-braided rope as big as a wrist, tied to an iron hook on the soaring vaulted ceiling. That rope held a giant crystal chandelier weighing a ton. Thorne's pride, a symbol of his grotesque luxury in the middle of this impoverished desert. And Thorne was standing right beneath it. The night wind howled in gusts, a crosswind. Silas had taught her how to compensate for the wind. If the grass leans to the left, aim 2 knuckles to the right. The grass was leaning to the left. Elara shifted the barrel to the right. Her heart pounded like a war drum. Silas was tied tightly to a wooden chair in the middle of the room. Thorne stood in front of him, sipping a mouthful of fine wine. Surrounding them were 5 guards armed to the teeth. In the corner of the room, tied to a smaller chair, was a little blonde girl with big, tear-filled eyes. "Mia," Silas called, trying to keep his voice calm. "Close your eyes, niece. Do not look." "Oh, let her look," Thorne sneered. He put the wine glass down, taking the leather tube his soldiers had just confiscated from Silas. He opened it, glanced through it, then nodded in satisfaction. The original, real signature. "You have been very obedient, ghost." Thorne walked to the blazing fireplace. He threw the file into it. The paper caught fire and flared up, his dark secrets turning to ash in an instant. "That is done." Thorne dusted off his hands, turning back to look at Silas. "Did you think I would let the girl go? You're too naive, Silas. I'm a businessman. I never leave loose ends." He drew a gold-plated dagger. He stepped closer to Silas, pressing the tip of the knife into the bleeding bullet wound on the former mercenary's right shoulder. Silas roared a sound of agony, his whole body convulsing, sweat pouring out like a bath. "Does it hurt?" Thorne whispered, twisting the knife deeper. "This is the price for betrayal, Silas. You took my money 5 years ago but did not complete the mission. Today, I will take back both the principal and the interest." Silas gasped for air, his face hanging down toward the floor. But then he started to laugh, a guttural, broken, wild laugh. "What are you laughing at?" Thorne frowned, stopping his hand. Silas raised his head, his single eye burned with fire, looking straight at Thorne with utter contempt. "I am laughing," Silas coughed up blood, "because you think you have won. You think burning that paper is the end. But you forgot one thing, Thorne." "What thing?" "I am a sniper," Silas said, his voice suddenly becoming strangely clear and steely. And the first rule of a sniper is, always have a spotter. Thorn froze. He looked around the room. What are you saying? Silas looked up at the ceiling, directly above Thorn's head. He shouted loudly, a scream that tore through his throat. Shoot, Alara! Silas's scream could not echo to where she was, but Alara saw the shape of his mouth through the scope. She saw him look up. That was the signal. Inhale, exhale halfway. Alara held her breath. The world around her dissolved. No more wind, no more darkness. There was only the brilliant golden rope in the crosshairs of the scope. Between two heartbeats, her index finger squeezed. Bang! The gunshot roared like thunder, kicking hard and painfully against her shoulder. But she did not care. She looked through the scope. The bullet pierced through the window, shattering a pane of glass. It flew past Silas's head, whistling a deadly sound, and embedded itself straight into the main, load-bearing rope of the chandelier. The rope snapped. In a tenth of a second, Thorn looked up. He saw thousands of glittering crystals rushing down onto his head like a meteor shower. He did not have time to scream. Crash! A terrible sound rang out. The entire mansion shook as if there were an earthquake. The ton-heavy chandelier collapsed, crushing Baron Thorn beneath a mountain of glass and metal. Dust flew up blindly. Sharp crystal shards sprayed everywhere like grenades. Two guards standing nearby were thrown far away by the shockwave. The remaining ones panicked, screaming in terror. What the hell was that? Silas, though covered in dust, was the most alert. He braced himself, using his last remaining strength to kick over the wooden chair that had been wobbling after the impact. He rolled on the floor, snatching the pistol of a guard, lying groaning on the ground. Bang! Bang! Two precise shots took down the two guards who were about to draw their guns. Mia! Run! Silas roared. Little Mia, being small, was not hit by the flying debris, shrinking back in fear. But when she heard that voice, survival instinct rose up. The little girl crawled under the table, running toward the side door. But the battle was not over. Thorn was not fully dead. From the crystal ruins, a bloody hand reached out. Thorn, with a mangled face and crushed legs, still tried to drag himself out. He pulled his gold-plated pistol, tremblingly aiming at Mia's running back. I will take you with me, he hissed through bloody teeth. Silas saw the gun barrel. He looked at Mia. The distance was too far for him to run and block the bullet, and his gun was out of ammunition. No time to think. Silas drew the dagger at his hip, the knife that had saved Alara, the knife that had cut the ropes, the knife that had been with him through 5 years of hell. He used all his remaining strength, throwing the knife toward Thorn. The knife spun in the air, the steel blade flashing with the light of death. Thwack! The knife buried itself deep into Thorn's throat. The brutal Baron's eyes rolled back. The gun in his hand fell to the ground, misfiring a harmless bang into the ceiling. He fell backward, sinking into the pile of broken crystals, the glittering grave he had built for himself. Silence enveloped the room. There was only the sound of Silas gasping and Mia sobbing. The main door burst open. Alara rushed in, hand still holding the smoking rifle. She looked around the desolate scene, then saw Silas lying against the wall, blood staining a large area of his shirt red, and she saw Mia. Mia! Mommy! Mother and daughter rushed toward each other, embracing tightly amidst the rubble. The broken sobs of reunion drowned out all pain. Silas looked at them. He felt the pain in his shoulder, in his head, in his entire body. His vision blurred, but the corners of his mouth lifted in a smile of relief. He reached for the pack of cigarettes in his pocket. It was crushed. He pulled out a broken cigarette, putting it to his lips but having no fire to light it. Mission accomplished, he whispered to himself. Then his head slumped onto his chest. The soothing darkness finally came to take him. Do you know what the sound of a collapsing empire is like? People often think it must be the sound of majestic war trumpets or the sound of cannons shaking the ground. But no. At the Stone Mansion tonight, the fall of an empire began with the sound of breaking crystal. It began with a dry crack on the ceiling, followed by the hiss of air being torn apart as the massive weight plunged down. And then, the explosion. Crash. Thousands, tens of thousands of sharp glass shards from the giant chandelier, the symbol of Baron Thorne's pride and absolute power, plummeted onto the pristine white marble floor. That sound was unlike anything you have ever heard. It was ear-piercing, deafening, a chaotic symphony of destruction, like the screaming of 1,000 imprisoned souls being released at once. The ground shook as if a dragon was stirring beneath the earth. Gypsum dust rose blindly, billowing like white tsunamis, swallowing the light, turning the magnificent hall into a hazy, smoky crypt. In that chaotic moment, time seemed to bend, stretching out into infinite small fragments. Silas Kincaid lay flat on the floor. The shockwave from the impact had knocked him sliding across the stone surface, slippery with dust and candle wax. His ears were ringing. A high-pitched, long whine rang in his head, drowning out all other sounds. He tried to open his eyes, but the stinging gypsum dust caused tears to well up. He felt small glass shards embedding into his face, into his arms, like needle pricks, but he did not care. The survival instinct of an old wolf rose up stronger than ever. He knew in this dust storm, whoever stood up first, that person lived. Cough, cough. A dry cough rang out a few steps away. A blackguard soldier, the one lucky enough to stand at the edge of the explosion, was scrambling to get up. He groped in the air, his rifle still dangling from his shoulder. Silas did not wait for the dizziness to pass. He roared, a roar choked in a throat full of dust, and rushed forward. He had no gun left. He had no knife left. He only had this broken body as a weapon. He rammed his entire body into the soldier. Both fell onto the floor, rolling on the pile of crunching, broken glass. The soldier tried to draw his gun. Silas punched. A punch with his left hand, the uninjured hand, aimed straight at the opponent's windpipe. The soldier gasped, eyes rolling back, then went limp. Silas panted, pushing the corpse away. He tried to stand up, but the pain from his right shoulder, where the old bullet wound had torn open, caused him to kneel on one leg. Fresh blood began to flow again, soaking his sleeve, dripping onto the white floor, painting gruesome crimson flowers. "Elara! Mia!" he shouted, his voice cracking, desperately searching for a response in the white mist. From the main door, a figure rushed in like a whirlwind. It was Elara Vance. She had discarded the rifle outside. Now, she was no longer a marksman. She was a mother. And there was no force on this earth, whether guns or red fire, that could stop a mother looking for her child. "Mia!" Elara screamed, rushing through the rubble, ignoring the sharp glass shards cutting into her worn boots. In the corner of the room, under the thick oak banquet table, the only thing remaining intact after the collapse, a whimpering sound rang out. Ilara knelt down, looking into the darkness under the table. A pair of big, round, tear-filled eyes were looking back at her. The little girl was covered in white dust like a forgotten porcelain doll. "Mummy? Oh, God! Mia!" Ilara pulled her daughter out, hugging the small, trembling body tight to her chest. She kissed her forehead, her hair, her smudged cheeks. I am here, you are safe. I am scared." The explosion was too loud. "It is okay now," Ilara whispered, though her heart was still beating like a war drum. She lifted the child up, using her body to shield her. "Close your eyes, Mia. Do not look. Let us go." Ilara turned her head, intending to run toward the main door where the moonlight outside was beckoning. But fate is ironic. Evil is often more persistent than people think. And the monster of this valley refused to die completely. From within the chaotic mess of twisted metal and shattered crystal, where the center of the chandelier used to be, a small movement appeared. A piece of gypsum ceiling was pushed aside. A bloody hand reached up, clinging tight to a bent iron bar. It was Baron Thorn. He no longer looked human. The wine-red velvet suit was now tattered, dyed a deeper crimson, the color of fresh blood. The chandelier had crushed his legs, crushing his pelvis under 1,000 pounds of weight. But his chest still heaved. Hatred, the dark fuel that had sustained him for years, was now the only thing keeping his heart beating. The handsome, arrogant face of yesterday was now terribly deformed. A long cut ran from his forehead to his chin, blood flowing down, obscuring one eye. But the remaining eye, that eye still burned with madness and cruelty. He saw Ilara. He saw the child in her arms. He saw the door to freedom they were about to reach. "No," Thorn hissed, the sound bubbling with blood through his teeth. "I will take everything." His right hand, trembling and mangled, slowly lifted. In that palm was a tiny, gold-plated Derringer pistol, the sleeve gun of cowardly aristocrats, holding only 2 bullets. But at this distance, 2 were more than enough. He did not aim at Silas. He knew he was finished. He did not need to kill the enemy. He wanted to kill the enemy's hope. He wanted Silas and Ilara to live the rest of their lives in hell, just as he was suffering right now. He aimed at Ilara's thin back, at Mia's golden hair. His finger, covered in blood and dust, slowly tightened on the trigger. Silas Kincaid, who was standing leaning against a stone pillar, gasping to regain his strength, suddenly saw the glint of metal in the rubble. He spun around. Time seemed to freeze. All surrounding sounds died out. There was only the sound of his heart pounding in his chest. Ilara was 10 paces away from him, her back turned to the danger. Thorn was lying 5 paces away. The rifle was out in the courtyard. His pistol had flown somewhere lost. He could not run in time to shield the mother and daughter from the bullet. His leg hurt too much, and the distance was too great. He could not scream. If he screamed, Ilara would turn around, and the bullet would embed itself in her chest instead of her back. The result would still be death. Despair rushed in, chilling his spine. Could it be that after everything, after blood and tears, he still failed? Was his destiny to watch those he protected die? Number. A memory flashed in his mind, fast as lightning. The memory of a scorching noon on the cliff of Devil's Canyon. The memory of a rope about to break. The memory of a dagger plunged into the rock to save a life. Silas Kincaid did not think anymore. He was no longer a human. He was a reflex. He was a war machine, forged through 1,000 life and death situations. Silas's left hand, the only hand still moving well, swung hard down to his belt. His fingers touched the rough, warm wooden handle. The dagger, the knife that had cut the rope binding Alara to death. The knife that had cut the rope binding his past. The knife that had traveled with him through the most humiliating years, through the coldest nights. He drew the knife. The muscles of his left shoulder tensed, veins standing out clearly under sun-tanned skin. He poured all his strength, all his hatred, all the redemption of his life into this throw. He threw it. The knife tore through the wind. In the dim light of dust and moon, it turned into a streak of deadly silver light. It spun perfectly in the air, the blade of sharp Damascus steel heading straight toward the target. Bang! The gunshot rang out, harsh and dry. Alara flinched, screamed, hugged her daughter's head tight, and collapsed to the floor by instinct. But there was no sensation of pain. There was no blood spraying from her back. There was no screaming cry from Mia. The bullet from Thorn had fired. But it did not fly toward Alara. It embedded itself straight into the marble floor, just inches from his hand, leaving a black scorch mark. Because at the very moment his finger squeezed the trigger, a terrible force had struck. Thwack! A wet, heavy sound ended all noise. Silas's knife had buried itself deep into the center of Thorn's chest, buried up to the wooden handle. The brutal Baron opened his eyes wide, staring blankly at the knife handle vibrating on his chest. He seemed unable to believe his eyes. He wanted to say something. His lips moved. He wanted to curse. He wanted to scream that he was God, but only pink bloody foam welled up from the corner of his mouth. The cruel light in his eyes extinguished as fast as a candle before a storm. The arm holding the gun dropped limp, the derringer falling with a clatter onto the floor full of glass shards. Baron Thorn, the man who had ruled the valley with fear, the man who had stolen water and lives, was dead. And ironically, he was finished by the very knife that had once saved his victim. Silence enveloped the room. This time, it was true silence. The dust began to settle. Alara slowly turned her head. She saw Thorn's motionless corpse. She saw the knife stuck in his chest. And she saw Silas. The man staggered. He fell to one knee, his left hand bracing against the floor to keep balance. Blood from his right shoulder had soaked the entire side of his shirt, dripping down to form a small pool at his feet. His breathing hissed in intervals, heavy and painful. "Silas!" Alara put Mia down, told the girl to turn away, then she rushed toward him. She knelt beside him, supporting his shoulders. Are you all right?" Her voice trembled, tears welling up again, washing away the layer of dust on her face. Silas looked up at her. His face was smeared with blood and gypsum dust, making him look like an ancient statue just excavated. He gulped for air, his chest heaving violently. His single eye looked at her. It was blurring from exhaustion, but for the first time in 5 years, it no longer contained haunting ghosts. It was clear. It was peaceful. "Is he dead yet?" Silas whispered, his voice so weak that Alara had to lean close to his ear to hear. Alara looked at Thorn's corpse one more time, then nodded vigorously. "Dead. It is over, Silas. It is finished." A smile of relief, distorted but sincere, appeared on Silas's cracked lips. He relaxed his body, his weight pressing onto Alara's arms. "Good," he whispered, eyes half closing. "Then I can sleep a little. I am so tired, Mrs. Vance." Dawn broke. It was not the scorching, harsh, blinding white sun of the usual desert. The sun rose from the east of the valley with a brilliant red color, deep and rich, dying than the fluffy clouds drifting lazily in pink. That light flooded through the wide-open main doors of the stone mansion, shining upon the ruins, turning the shattered crystal shards on the floor into thousands of glittering diamonds. It was a red dawn, the color of blood that had been spilled to wash this land clean, and the color of a heart beating again. The sound of urgent horse hooves rang out from afar. The federal marshals and the people of Los Olivos town had arrived. They saw the smoke. They saw the collapse. They found the evidence in the fireplace. The most important papers were luckily at the bottom, so they were only singed at the edges and not fully burnt. They found the bodies of the mercenaries, and they found the survivors. 1 hour later, Alara sat on the marble steps of the mansion, what used to be a forbidden throne. She held Mia, who was sleeping soundly in her arms, a wool blanket from the rescue team wrapped tight around mother and daughter. She saw Silas. He was being bandaged by the town doctor. He refused the ambulance stretcher. He sat leaning against the wheel of a police wagon, his upper body bare, crisscrossed with scars and white bandages. He was smoking a cigarette the sheriff had just given him, eyes squinting at the rising sun. He looked 10 years older than last night, but he also looked more relieved than ever. He turned his head. His gaze met hers. In that moment, no words were needed. Alara wanted to stand up. She wanted to run over. She wanted to keep him. She wanted to tell him that the debt was paid, but the gratitude was not. That her ranch, where the underground aquifer was now safe, always had a place for him. That she and Mia needed him. But when she looked deep into that ash-grey eye, she understood. A wild wolf cannot become a guard dog. A warrior, even for a just cause, cannot live peacefully in a house he had just had to wash clean with blood. He belonged to the roads. He belonged to the shadows where the justice of the law could not shine. He needed to go to find himself again, or to run away from the peace he felt he did not deserve to receive. Silas Kincaid stood up. He draped his tattered shirt over his shoulder. He walked toward his black horse, the loyal animal that had waited for him all night outside the gate. He did not come to greet her. He only nodded slightly, raising his hand to touch the brim of his hat lightly, a classic farewell gesture of Western cowboys. "Good luck, madam." Alara smiled through her tears, nodding in response. "Thank you, Ghost." Silas climbed onto the horse. His posture was crooked from pain, but his back was straight. He spurred the horse toward the rising sun, his solitary silhouette printed against the glowing red sky, gradually blending into the light until he was only a tiny black dot on the vast horizon. Alara hugged Mia tight, whispering into her daughter's silky hair, "Look closely, my child. Never forget that man." This valley was finally quiet. Not the deadly silence of fear hiding behind closed doors, but the silence of peace. The underground water from Thomas's map had been tapped, bringing lush green life to the fields that were once dry and cracked. Children, like Mia, could now run and play on the hills without fearing the dark or men in red velvet suits. Silas Kincaid never returned. He had departed, vanishing like a wisp of tobacco smoke, true to his name, the Ghost. Some said he died of an infected wound on the southern border. Some swore they saw him wearing a sheriff's badge in some nameless town by the sea. Others said he was simply looking for a place to die in peace. But Alara Vance did not believe those rumors. She did not care about legends. She only cared about the truth. Every time sunset fell, when the desert sky turned a brilliant red, like the blood and fire of that fateful day, Alara would still often stand on the porch, fingers caressing the old dagger Silas had left behind, the only thing remaining of him. She looked toward the distant horizon, where the sun was setting behind the dark purple mountain ranges. She did not wait for him to return. She knew men like him never looked back. She stood there to give thanks, because she knew somewhere out there, amidst the rugged canyons and barren deserts, there was a man with one eye, still silently guarding the peaceful dreams of the weak, just as he had once guarded her dream. And if you listen very closely in the night wind rustling through the sagebrush, you can hear his oath still echoing, whispering to this land, "Today is not the day to die."